A codependent, subservient, tries to stand up to his larger-than-life boss in Renfield.
Mafia, wake up, wake up, wake up.
You have created a monster and it will destroy you.
What a relationship. The stuff of dreams.
That's putting it lightly. Welcome back to the Monsters vs. Men podcast. This is the bargain basement of the monster podcasting airwaves, where two dependents try to stay alive and stay connected by chatting about weekly monster movies. This week, as we stay alive, we are discussing Renfield. Who is the dependent in this relationship, Alex?
That's a good question. Maybe we would be the people in the counseling.
maybe. Oh, geez. You tell us. The audience tells us who is the Renfield and who's the Dracula of this relationship.
I mean,
if there is one, yeah, they're going to tell us where our relationship's great.
Here's the thing. I think if either one of us is Dracula, it's me.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is I don't think you're the dependent, though. Right. So, who would you be? You'd be John Ralphio.
Which, by the way, I can't even call him whatever his name is in this movie. He's just John Ralphio.
He's just John Ralphio.
I don't even know his name as an actor. He's just John Ralphio. The voice of Sonic, John Ralphio.
It's Ben Schwartz is his name.
I think I could have named that, but we're not calling him Ben Schwartz the rest of this movie. It's John Ralphio for the rest of the movie. For the rest of the review. Yeah. All right, man. Well, it's a Nic Cage film, so we better get started.
Yeah, don't be cagey about it. That's terrible. God, what's wrong with me? 2 weeks in a row.
We're at a time of vampires, Alex. Yeah. Well, at least vampire remake films. This week, we take a look at Renfield, the Dracula-based spinoff. We're fast-forwarding 100 years in an alternate universe where Dracula was not slain. We find Renfield and the Count in modern-day New Orleans. There, Renfield is still collecting dead bodies for his master while having a continuing existential crisis. To pull this off, the film combines action, horror, and comedy to create its own take on the famous bloodsucker. But does this take the cake, or should we give it the steak, Alex?
Oh, that's tough. I would say maybe overall for me, it takes the cake, but it's definitely got a few splinters in it, so you better watch where you eat. Because there's definitely some pretty big issues in this film. Mostly, what is even worse is that these decisions that I have problems with could have easily, and I do mean very easily, been fixed. Like, they could have been chopped out of the movie without having to do anything else. You didn't even have to like reshoot or do anything to fix the issues that I actually have with this film for the most part. Unfortunately, because these issues do exist, it does drag down a fun, goofy, and sometimes interesting film. I just wish my issues here just weren't. I mean, obviously, I wish they weren't present, and I'll dig more into those in a bit. But I will say, I did laugh a good bit, and most of the action scenes were surprisingly well done. Plus, I absolutely love Nic Cage's Dracula, so he is quite the highlight. Nice. What about you? Cake or steak, Eric?
Well, this is a film I wish I had watched with you, Alex, because I know if I had watched it with you, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. So to answer my original question, I mostly want to give this film the steak. But before I explain why, I do want to start with some things that I found entertaining and creative about this film, starting with the climax, actually. Renfield's battle at the end with Dracula was probably the coolest and most creative part, with Rebecca and Renfield teaming up to ultimately defeat the vampire. I like the shooting the shoe part that Dracula mocks right beneath Renfield's body to bring him back to life. And I like the pulling out of Dracula's teeth specifically. It's gruesome, but it is interesting and unique. Yeah, I'll also say that some of the comedy does work for me here, especially some of the parts with John Ralphio. Excluding some of the opening parts with him where he's like being chased and throwing cocaine behind him, which is dumb.
God,
like
it was dumb.
It's like, this is stupid.
It was stupid.
But the mob connection was one of the more unique aspects of this film as well. I totally can see Dracula fitting in with the mob underworld. Unfortunately for this film, though, we do have What We Do in the Shadows, which does take the cake when it comes to vampire satires. Did you ever find yourself comparing this film to that one, Alex, or to that series, or to any other vampire films or comedy shows?
No, not at all. Actually, I think the only film I actually did find it comparable to, in terms of its attempted tone, is something like Zombieland. I think that would be the closest. But unfortunately, this takes a lot of the funny things that Zombieland does, and unfortunately wastes them. Like, one of my biggest pet peeves in film is narration. Now, it's not a stake through the heart by any means for a film. I love a lot of movies with narration, and some that even have exposition. But I do think it is remarkably hard to do it, especially when it is weaved throughout the film. Here, it is a complete and total waste.
Yeah, that.
I think Nicholas Hoult nails his role as Renfield, but his narration, quite frankly, sucks. It's terrible. And not only that, it's not funny at all. It just ends up feeling very try-hard. Like, hey, look how zany I am. When the rest of the film around it isn't quite like that. I mean, if we ignore the cocaine scene, which is just dumb. Yeah. Again, I feel like this is something that was almost improvised on set, and they're like, yeah, it was funny when he did that. Let's keep it in. Like, that's how bad it is. It just makes no sense. So the narration is awful. And this is one of the things I think could have been cut out. I think you could have cut out almost all the narration in this film.
Yeah.
And it would have improved
you don't lose
quite
anything.
A bit,
you
actually.
You don't lose anything.
You don't lose anything. Actually, I think you actually gain things because you're not being taken out by the terrible narration.
Yes.
And then I will get to some good things later, I promise. But I really do have another issue here. And this is another thing that could be cut out of the movie and not have cost anything. The music in the movie is awful. It is so bad. Like, what the heck is this? Like, we just decided to get some generic tracks and just slap them into action scenes and not even try to fit them in whatsoever. Like, it doesn't make any sense. There's that first action sequence where he's fighting the drug dealers, and we've got some classical music that everybody's heard, but nobody knows the name of. And the music's playing, and it doesn't match up at all with the scene. It makes no sense in the context of the movie. Like, it's just weird. It's not funny. It's off-putting. Like, you could have just removed it. Honestly, you should have put even more generic music in this film, and it would have worked better than what is in here. And it sounds like, Eric, like you also have some issues. Yeah. So I would like you to just go ahead, piggyback off of me,
okay,
and give this a stake. I want to hear what your issues are.
Good. Well, a couple thoughts came to mind before I get into my own issues, Alex. First, I think I only saw part of this movie, but I thought Nicholas Hoult is a funny choice in this movie because he plays in another horror satire film, Warm Bodies, which I feel like probably has a similar vibe as this one, right? Like, but I don't think I saw all of that.
Warm Bodies is
so
better
I can't
than
comment
this.
on it completely, but like I was like, that's an interesting casting choice because it feels like they're in the same universe of sort of tones, but I could be completely off there. I also just didn't notice the music at all, so that wasn't a huge issue for me because it literally was so. I just didn't remember it at all. The classical music part makes me think maybe they were trying to go for that old school sort of classic horror feel, but just completely didn't pull it off. So when I reflect though on my issues, I think it comes back to respecting the audience, Alex. And it starts with what you mentioned, the voiceover aspect of the film. I felt like I could even hear a difference in the sound quality of the voiceover. It felt obvious.
So
no, it just felt obvious that this was a studio show during post-production to try to, quote, help the audience out. But it never added anything to the story as a whole, with the exception of the opening scene, right? The opening flashback scene.
You're right. It's too clean.
It's like it's post-production. We get a voiceover moment to explain Dracula's healing blood at the same time we see it happen on screen, for example. And we get another one when Renfield is holding the chloroform when Rebecca shows up and he says, this doesn't look good in front of a cop. You're like, why are you showing me? Why are you telling me this? I see it on screen. The acting is good enough that I know what to feel. You don't need a voiceover, right? It's terrible. So it just dumbs down the movie so much. And I also think the film suffers by not knowing exactly what it wants to be. Is this a comedy? Is it an over-the-top Tarantino-esque action film noir, horror? It doesn't lean into any of these enough to see its purpose, beyond the incredibly on-the-nose metaphorical elements, which I guess aren't quite so metaphorical as they are literal, right, with the codependency part. And I will say, those group therapy scenes are probably the best ones in the movie for me, despite being quite heavy-handed. It's like, I think that's where the whole idea of the film comes from, right? It's just like somebody was watching Dracula one night and we're like, oh my gosh, this is such a codependent relationship. And it just went from there, right? And it could have been a great short film about codependent Renfield in group therapy, and it would have been great, right? Because those scenes were the best. And honestly, the best development of that codependency theme was how Dracula brought up the personal stuff with Renfield about leaving his wife and daughter, and how that came back up again later on as a real source of guilt and shame for Renfield. That part actually worked for me, so I'll give it credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in total agreement with you about that, and that's where some of the pleasant surprises in the film come in for me. I bought into that shame of him leaving his family and the way Dracula brings that up to force him to keep doing things for him. And it's not only that, though, in the film that made me... What I'm blown away by, blown away is strong. I shouldn't have said that. But what I'm impressed by, I guess, is that I bought into the shame of him leaving his family, and I bought into his care for the support group.
Yeah.
You know, when they all get brutally murdered, I actually bought his care for them, and that he didn't want them to get hurt, and that this was something very important to him. I really, in a film that doesn't hit a lot of emotional beats, to hit these two really hard, I was impressed by that. I've got to give it its roses on the things it succeeds in, which are the things like this. And I think the abusive relationship angle here, while also probably with somebody laughing while watching Dracula, they came up with it, and definitely on the nose, really felt believable for me. And I think it gave I appreciate that it gave a serious depiction in a lot of ways of this relationship, while still managing to lean into the comedy aspects, especially earlier on, and then kind of making it more and more serious as things go on. I really appreciate the way it handled it. But this isn't the only thing, though, that I liked about the film. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the action itself, since, that's kind of my bread and butter for a lot of films, I think it's great, actually. I think the restaurant scene is okay. But the hotel and the final battle, I think the choreography, the wire work, and the blood are all really great. Yes, the blood is pretty cartoonish and definitely CGI. But I think the way it looks works within the film because of how inherently goofy it is and how over the top it is, that I don't actually mind that it looks unrealistic, because I feel like it fits some of the moments in the film where it feels like it really knows what it wants to be. So I really appreciate that.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Yeah, what about you?
Well, I'll
Anything
tell you
this,
like? The action, it wasn't that I thought some of it was creative and funny and interesting. I just had a tough time with it within the context of the film. I don't know. It was tough for me to isolate some of the violent action with the sort of themes that the film was trying to present. But it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't. It's not going to stand out to me as something that I will take with me for a while. But I think the other thing I wanted to say is this, and I'm going to start to walk on some holy ground here and probably commit some sacrilege. But I will say this: Nicolas Cage has the potential to be a good, albeit silly, Dracula. But at the end of the film, I wish we had gotten a bit more moments to showcase Cage's Dracula. Kind of like the film itself. I'm not sure if this Dracula is supposed to be scary, funny, or just nasty. But mainly, I just get nasty, which is unfortunate because I think Cage has the chops to deliver both the comedy and the horror as hard as that can be to pull off. So maybe this was just me, but I also thought Cage, though again, it's hard to ever criticize the Cage, felt a little distracted by his teethy mouthpiece. It's just a couple moments. I'm like, his pronunciation here, it doesn't quite land. And this is different. This is weird. So his performance distracted me more than made me enjoy the film at moments, which was just another thing I didn't expect. But it was a regrettable. I have to regrettably inform you of that criticism, Alex, even though you may disagree.
I do. I do. I love Drax Cage. Or Cage's Drac. See that they become synonymous.
Oh my gosh, he really has nailed down the method acting.
And let's just go ahead and say it. Let's go ahead and say what's on the tip of our tongues, especially your tongue. He's a better Dracula than Bela Lugosi.
Oh gosh.
Which we haven't even talked about, Eric. Getting those remake scenes.
Oh yeah.
Where they just show the original film with the other actors is so funny.
Fantastic.
Like having Renfield, seeing the Renfield shot, right? Where he's just like creepily standing at the bottom of the Demeter. So cool. Yeah. Like I love that. Like that was a good sign for me of things to come. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite accurate. That's I misread the sign a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's all good. MVM Plus today, Alex, we take a different turn. We are not speaking about Dracula, but we're going to talk about our first love on the podcast, Godzilla. Because Godzilla, besides each other, Alex, our first movie love on the podcast, Godzilla. We had the teaser for Godzilla -1 released this week. And so we kind of get into that and talk about a little bit about our expectations, some of our hopes and dreams, some of the things we hope that it doesn't happen. And I think it's a good discussion. I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about as far as speculation is concerned with Godzilla -1. I am looking forward to that movie quite a bit. We also talk about Alex's double feature that he just watched and which film we're more interested in seeing, Barbie or Oppenheimer. That's at patreon.com/MVM pod. pretty interesting one today, I think. Patreon.com/MVM pod. But let's get into our awards, Alex. Compelling character award. Who you got?
I had to give it to Dracula. Not just because of how of his like ferociousness in this, right? And you said earlier you don't know if he's nasty or mean or no, scary or nasty or something or funny.
Yeah.
I think for the most part he's pretty nasty. And but he's also, it's those bits of comedy where his delusion, right? I wish we leaned into his delusion more, because that was part of the fun, the fun of Renfield talking about Dracula and their pattern, right? He always his ego gets bigger and bigger, and then someone knocks him down a peg. That's just what keeps happening, right? And here we're in the middle stage, right? He's in the ego's getting bigger and bigger, and he suddenly just concocts an idea where he's going to take over the world. But it's so half thought out that it's hilarious because he thinks that this small time gang is going to help him rule the world. I think that element is very funny because it's just impossible for him to win in that case.
No,
what about you, Eric?
I'm with you. I think if we lean into that angle, like that's the best angle for this movie to lean into, because it's not trying to be scary. It's trying to be funny. So the more it leans into that angle, the better. My most compelling character, though, is Rebecca, actually. The officer, played by Awkwafina. Yeah. I think she, as our outside character, our outside main character that we don't know anything about, has a lot to do in terms of storytelling, right? Like there has to be some reason for her to exist. And I think the film does a good enough job at kind of giving us that motivation in an unconventional way and making us care about her as a character. So she's got an interesting enough backstory to make that happen. So I liked Rebecca's character quite a bit.
I think she does a really great job here.
Yeah, it's a slightly different role, for her, but I like it. Yeah, I like it.
A little less comedic than most of her.
A little less.
Like it's still very comedic.
Yeah, and still dry. It's some of that dry humor.
A little less over the top.
Less over the top. Yeah, it's good.
What about your most memorable line award?
So this ties into one of the things you were saying, Alex, about him building himself up and being delusional Dracula, that is. He says, "Some call me the Dark One, others the Lord of Death. To most, I am simply known as," Trevante yells, "Renfield's boss!" Just completely taken away that moment. It's great. I love it. Those moments were cracking me up. So again, and it revolves around those therapy scenes, which I just think are the best. Like the therapy scenes are the best. Because they really go all in with the absurd moments. I love the part where they talk about true power.
Oh yeah,
that part is funny too. Mark is it's funny.
It's so funny.
What about you though? What's your most memorable line?
Well, you mentioned Mark. Mark's got my favorite line. He says, "This is the end of the film after they've all been killed. Surprisingly, you see them all back, and you're like, what?" So he says, "And thank you for bringing us back from the other side, having seen the things we can't unsee, and knowing the things we can't unknow." Good session, everyone.
I'm glad they leaned into the comedic element of that, because it is so stupid. But right, it's such a cop out in a way. But like, if you're gonna do that, at least make it a comedic moment, and they do. So that was good. Yeah. What about your can't believe that acting award?
Since you badmouthed them earlier, I gotta give them the award. Nic Cage is Drac. I think he does. I think he actually does a really good job being a menacing Drac, and also like this egotistical, just bully Drac, right? I think he does. I think he does a really good job waffling between the two. So I actually bought him, and I actually thought he was scary at times. So yeah, he actually really worked for me. And Eric, what about you? Who you got for your can't believe that acting?
Well, I'll tell you in a second. I will say, okay, so the one scene that like it didn't land very well was the more subtle scene, actually, which was in the Renfield's apartment. Whenever Dracula shows up in Renfield's apartment, there were a couple moments there I was like, man, this just isn't connecting as much as it should. But enough Nic Cage bashing. I promise, I shall never bash Nic Cage again. So, we mentioned him already, but Brandon Scott Jones, who plays Mark, who is the leader of these therapy sessions, he's so just good. Hilarious, man. That guy is great. He really has some great comedic timing, some great looks that he just gives. He's got some comedy chops, man, and I would like to see him in some more things because I think he's got some potential there to just be hilarious. But he does a great job here, so I've got to give it to him because Mark was a contender for my compelling character award just because of he made me laugh the most. So I love Mark.
Mark is so good. Yeah, he's definitely a runner-up for me.
What about your that's a good shot award?
Mine is the first shot of Dracula's hospital lair, where you just see all the blood bags. You don't know what they are at first, for at least I didn't. Where you just see all his like weird setup, right? And it's all decrepit and all that. You see all these things hanging from the wall. And as you look at him, you realize that he just has a million blood bags hanging from the wall. I think it's really cool and a nice little creepy atmosphere shot. Creepier than it ends up being, but I just like that. What about you, Eric?
So mine is whenever Dracula rises from his coffin in front of the crime
the mob,
boss. Right? Yeah. And he's got his like leather cape on, and it's just an iconic sort of shot rising from the coffin. It's just that is what I think of when I think of Dracula, and I love how it played into that element there. So it was great.
Yep, I had a feeling you would pick that one. That's a good
one. Unique award, Alex.
Yeah, mine was funniest play with the lore of Dracula. And, this one really leans into the idea that Dracula has to be invited somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that he gets into Renfield's house because he has a welcome mat.
I know.
It literally says, come on in.
I love that.
That was so funny.
Yeah. There are some funny little lore pieces. Like, you won't get them at all unless, like, you've seen the movie or read the books even, right? Like there's that line from one of the guys at the rehab place where it talks about like controlling rats with his mind, and Mark's like, it's okay, don't listen to him, he's on something, right? But like that actually happens in like the book if I remember correctly, right? So awesome. Like this guy knew something about Dracula that was like insightful, and they just kind of dismissed him as being on drugs. Awesome. So there's a lot of great lore little things that got me too. So I like that. All right, my unique award was the best use of flashback. We mentioned it already, but the tie back to the original Dracula was just awesome.
So good.
I love that shot of like Dracula's face. It's so good. And around that same time, Alex, it was funny. I was watching it. You sent me this color version of like some of these classic movies, classic horror movies, classic Universal horror movies that had been put in color just for fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And man, like some of them looked great, and the Dracula ones look great. Bride of Frankenstein looked great, but of course they had just some of those shots that are so iconic. You don't even realize how iconic they are until you start to see them again, and you realize how burnt in your memory they are. And those shots that they decide to choose from the original Dracula film are just shots that you like. They are with you. You will not forget those shots, and they play on them here in this film, which is great.
Yeah. Good pick.
Cool, man. So that brings us to our final thoughts and tiered rating. Why don't you go ahead and start this time?
Yeah. This is a low gamma tier. There's enough elements here for me to find that are funny and creative. And then I like the performances as well. So there's enough here for me to recommend to somebody else, albeit with, some caveats. Like, it's got some problems. And they're just really silly, honestly, decisions in the film that could have been easily remedied. For me, again, it's the voice, it's the narration, and it's the music, and just some of the other tonal shifts, like you mentioned, the cocaine throwing is so bad. But there's other elements like Dracula and the action that I really do like, and the humor does mostly land for me overall. So it is a recommend, but there's caveats like, I'm going to give you a lot of other things before I tell you to watch this, unless you just love Dracula. What about you, Eric? Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not far away from you, man. I thought you might be a little bit higher overall, but this is a low gamma tier film for me. The narration is bad. I think the tone is inconsistent, and I laughed at some of the parts, probably about half of what I was probably supposed to laugh at, this is not a terrible ratio, but I'm sure, as I said, this would have been a more fun film to watch with you by my side, because I know we both would have probably laughed more and had a good time with it. So I think there's a lot to have a good time with here. I don't think it's necessarily a creative film, even though it wants to be, and it should be. I don't think it's quite as creative as it needs to be in order to stand out to me. So that's why, this is a lower gamma tier film. Now, Alex, ChatGPT has been listening into our conversations again. And I have asked it to give it a rating out of 5 as well. So are you ready to hear ChatGPT's critic consensus about this film?
I am. What is it?
Renfield. Renfield offers a fun and somewhat interesting film with good laughs, well done action scenes, and an entertaining performance by Nic Cage as Dracula. However, the movie is hindered by easily fixable issues, including wasted comedic potential, poor narration, and subpar music choices. Despite some enjoyable elements, the film struggles with its tone, voice over reliance, and a lack of focus, diluting its overall impact. 3 out of 5 stars.
Wow. That's horrifying, Eric. I don't think I want to be able to get over this.
I think it's hilarious.
It is. It is hilarious.
So I'm going to keep doing it because it's funny. But
That's fine. I think it's a great.
This is that's a summary of it's like our combined thoughts, which I find interesting, right? I wish I would have had it for some of our films that we just completely had completely differing opinions on. That would be hilarious to see. But you know what I'm thinking next week, Alex? We took a departure this week for our for this film, right? We wanted to check out Renfield's kind of a standalone film. We've been wanting to watch it and review it to tie into our Dracula and our Universal Monster series. Next week, we're going to continue our animated series, The Batman versus Dracula, which was a Patreon choice and ties perfectly into Renfield. What say you?
That's a great idea. And you know what's really weird about that? I was really wanting to watch a DC animated movie last night. I got ready to watch one, and then I got way too tired early last night.
There you go.
I tapped out. But
it also happens to be the next film chronologically in our animated series list, so that works well.
Look at that! Look at
that! All right, man. I am looking forward to that. Any rhymes for Batman versus Dracula?
I can't wait to see Dracula go up against bats. And I can't wait to see all of that in his arsenal.
Hey, that's bats.
Shoot.
Bats, not bats, Alex.
What? Oh, these. Oh, jeez.
No, that's good. I like it. As always.
No. Thank you, Doc.
As always, thank you for listening to Monsters vs. Men. You can leave feedback on this episode at mvmpod.com or email us at mvmpod@gmail.com, and we'll read them on the show. You can also follow us and message us on Twitter and Instagram at mvm_pod. Become a bargain basement at patreon.com/mvmpod and receive weekly bonus content, including special reviews, interviews, and host chats. And if you can't join at this time, a rating, a review, or a share always helps. Monsters vs. Men is produced by Alex Burnett. Executive producers are Kevin Alexander, Faye Basier, John Freeman, and Michael Herndon. Special thanks to our wives, Kama, Rock Band for PlayStation 3, which formed Subblock B, Louis Loops, Senior Honda, Truth Collector, our Instagram connector, and you, the listener, for listening. I almost forgot Senior Honda for a second. Until next time, though, Alex, don't
forget to pin two men to a wall with their friends' arms
and try to stay alive.
Mafia, wake up, wake up, wake up.
You have created a monster and it will destroy you.
That was a memorable death to me. That was pretty intense.
Right? I actually like the commentary that the people have while watching it. Like, oh my God.
I love how, Rebecca was like, when people say I've seen worse, this is my worst.
That was a good one. Yeah.